voices, our views. This is Politics in Black. What's happening, family?
What's going on, everybody on the interwebs?
We are back. Happy Sunday, fam. We are back for another episode of Politics in Black, brought to you by ADOS Los Angeles. Glad you are here today with us. Once again, my name is Chad Brown. I'm only one half of your hosting team. Sitting across from me, you know her, you love her, the incredible Friday Jones.
Hey, everybody.
So we're coming to you for an incredible show today. We're going to take on a topic that we discuss as ADOS that we know is affecting our communities, and that is environmental racism. And so as we were getting prepared for this show, we gave a lot of thought to a lot of the teachings that we get from Yvette Carnell on a weekly basis, thinking about how ADOS and her teachings that we live with 400 years of accrued disadvantage and cost in our communities from slavery and Jim Crow, which makes us particularly vulnerable to both man-made and natural disasters. And as we see with the recent COVID-19 pandemic, extremely vulnerable to pandemics and sickness and things of that nature as well. So today we've got two guests we're going to bring to you on this topic of environmental racism. We're going to talk to a social psychiatrist who studies the link between environment and mental health. And then we're going to bring up a council member from Flint, Michigan. And as you all know, Flint, Michigan was the ground zero for one of the worst public health crises that we've seen in the modern era. He was on the ground, and he's going to bring us an inside perspective on the Flint water crisis. So it's another great show. I'm glad you're here with us on Sunday. Friday, I'm ready to go. You ready to go?
I'm ready to go. People, all the AOC fans, I need y'all to show up.
Absolutely.
Because this is the ADOS version of environmental racism.
We're going to be talking Black New Deal today, y'all. So first to the podcast, we're going to bring Dr. Mindy Love. And Mindy is a board...
Fullilove.
Fullilove. I'm sorry. Dr. Mindy Fullilove. Mindy is a board-certified psychiatrist who explores the ties between environment and mental health. She received her bachelor's degree from Bryn Mawr College and her MS and MD degrees from Columbia University. Dedicated to the psychology of place, Mindy's research started in '86 when she linked the AIDS epidemic with place of residence, and she continues to focus on the health problems caused by inequality. For the past 30 years, Mindy has been investigating how broken connections between different sections of cities harm public health and explores ways to reconnect them. Previously, Mindy taught at Columbia University and was a lecturer at Parsons. Please welcome to the podcast, Dr. Mindy Fullilove.
Woohoo! Welcome, Dr. Fullilove. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well.
We are well.
Welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah.
So we wanted to hop in a little bit with Bacon's Rebellion because we have a reading list, the ADOS crowd does.
The book club.
Our book club, the Breaking Brown Book Club. And one of our readings was American Freedom, American Slavery. And Bacon's Rebellion was talked about a little bit, and it from a perspective is essentially how whiteness became the American standard. And so can you just talk a little bit about Bacon's Rebellion?
Yeah, it's an important event because it's at the point at which the Southern colonies have really begun to institute slavery. They've begun to work out the rules of how they're going to do it. But they haven't yet created the differentiation between the poor white farmers and the black slaves or the indentured servants. So all those people get together. So the indentured servants get together with the black slaves and start a rebellion. And the oligarchy in Virginia is like, oh no, we can't have that. How do we break it up? How do we help them? How do we keep them apart? How do we help them see that they have nothing in common? And so one of the things that they did to suppress the rebellion was to give the black slaves and the white indentured servants different punishments. Mm-hmm. So that becomes the beginning of the differentiation, and it becomes a crucial part, one of the real legs of really American society is this concept that the black slaves were not the equal of the other people. And obviously, Native people suffered from that same thing. So did women. So this inequality as kind of the cornerstone of the nation gets a real leap forward in the aftermath of Bacon's Rebellion.
Absolutely. So looking at Bacon's Rebellion as kind of the starting point and the invention of that inequality based on race, you kind of took that concept further and started talking about an actual ecology of inequality that, started then and still exists and persists today. Could you talk to us a little bit about your concept of the ecology of inequality?
Well, you mentioned that I'm a psychiatrist. My specialty is social psychiatry, which looks at how social systems affect mental health. And I'm also trained in family therapy. So part of what's interesting to me is how do you help groups of people, large groups of people, deal with their problems, with the things that are troubling them as a society. In 2016, thinking ahead, we said, 2019 is going to be the anniversary of Jamestown. And we think it would be very healing for people to observe that anniversary. And so we started a project called 400 Years of Inequality. And we focused on inequality because, really learning from Bacon's Rebellion and other events, that one of the harms of slavery that lingers to this day as an active toxic agent in our society is this concept of inequality, that some people are not fully human. And who's not fully human changes. So it could be the Irish, it could be the Jews, it could be the black people, it could be the immigrants. But there's always somebody. Mm-hmm. And so
it's always us. It might be somebody some of the time, but it feels like it's black people all the time. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's a concept.
Historically.
That's a concept I like to...
I agree, but I think it would be wrong to say that it always has to be that way. Absolutely. We don't know what strange things could happen in the future. It could be, you know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah.
Stranger things have happened than that the group on the bottom becomes the group on the top. But if we don't get rid of inequality, we'll have a group on the top and a group on the bottom. And so that's so toxic to where we are now.
Well, wealth has calcified in levels that it hasn't really been in this country since the Depression, in terms of percentages, in terms of a percentage spread. But we've never seen wealth like this in this country before.
Wealth inequality like this.
There is a concept that Yvette Carnell has come up with, and Yvette Carnell is one of the founders of the ADOS political movement. And she talks about lineage therapy, and I spent a little bit of time on your website looking at some of the exercises that you have, and I think for ADOS there was something called Walk Us Through. No, I Am 400 Years, the I Am 400 Years exercise, and the exercise can be found at inequality.org. I want you to actually take us through how that became. I like it a lot because I think the immigrant population in the United States is very proud of wherever it is that they come from, their heritage, having their culture, bringing their culture to America and adding to the melting pot. And I think that for ADOS, for American descendants of slavery, particularly for our grandparents and our parents who really lived through the Jim Crow experience here in the United States, it being a descendant of the enslaved Africans has been almost weaponized against us, where we feel shame. And ADOS is trying to remove the stigma and remove the shame, because those are some of the strongest people. Only the strongest survived a lot of the challenges. And that particular exercise, I Am from 400 Years, I thought was just a lovely sort of way for us to almost get in front of a mirror and tell ourselves our personal story. And so if you could share that with the audience today, I think that would be a moment of healing for some of us.
I love that you picked up on that. It's not, we didn't actually invent it. We adapted it from somebody else. But it's a very intimate poem. It's sort of I am from. And then it asks you to, it's a kind of Mad Libs kind of thing where you put in words. And so it's sort of, I am from, and it would be like plants, or I am from food. You fill in a food. And there are various things that you talk about where you're from. And it's gorgeous to hear how people deal with that. It's just a exercise that we've loved doing with groups of people and with school kids as well. It's not lineage in the long sense. It's really lineage in the intimate sense. I am from my grandmother's kitchen. I am from gingerbread, which I learned from my mother. It's that kind of lineage, but it's very affirming. It's beautiful. Mm-hmm. There's another exercise, Friday, that you may have seen, which was created by Dr. Angel Acosta, who does mindfulness education, and it's a 7 generations meditation. So asking you to think back 7 generations.
That's interesting for me because 7 generations is the ancestor on my father's side who was from Cameroon. She is 7 generations back from me.
It's beautiful. When I first did that meditation, one of the things that came to me was that my father was born in 1906 and raised by people who had been slaves. And they all gathered in the church, but the church was led by these people who had been slaves. And one of the teachings that he always talked about was, let your light so shine that others may see it and honor your Father who art in heaven. And it occurred to me in that moment, those 2 facts, that the church that he went to, which so influenced his morality and his sense of self, was led by former slaves. And that's what they taught him, that there was the light of God in him. So I think that, some of this is your point that the people who survived were very strong people, but they also understood that it was the white people who were crazy.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Fullilove, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your concept of a place of residence. And you speak to the phenomenon of redlining as something that broke connections between communities that then led to, obviously, inequality between those communities, which then left communities vulnerable for sort of environmental impacts, negative environmental impacts. So I'd like to, if you could expound a little bit on that link between redlining and how all communities are impacted, and how it is a policy or a American kind of legacy that hurts all of us.
Well, people talk about the redlining maps. So I had this idea. I would like to see one. So this was a few years ago, but it was just at the point where everything was starting to be on the internet. So I said, well, it's got to be on the internet. And so Googled redlining maps. And I expected to see a map with a red line around the Black neighborhood. But that's not what it was. I was pretty shocked. The whole city is divided into 4 parts. Mm-hmm. And the parts are ranked by really on 2 dimensions, the age of the buildings and whether it's white or non-white people. So new buildings, old buildings, white, non-white people, to create these 4 parts. And so it gives a ranking system. The whole city is ranked. Mm-hmm. And if they, and then what they're looking at is if the undesirable racial elements, which is literally what they say, are moving into the good neighborhoods, which is literally what they say. And they call that infiltration or encroachment. So, this is one of those things where you think about your own family, right? So this is in the 1930s. My dad had migrated from the South. My dad was not infiltrating or encroaching. Mm-hmm. He was looking for work. So it's so profoundly offensive.
Yeah.
And these are literally the words on the U.S. government form that people were sent into the field to complete. So the hostility and the anger, it's quite wide. They're not just talking about Black people. They're talking about immigrants. They're talking about Jews. They're talking about Native Americans. They're talking about Asians. So everybody who at that point is not white. It's a horrific thing that we did that the government did in the 1930s. But obviously it comes on top of the segregation that existed at that point, but it also becomes part of furthering it. Mm-hmm. These neighborhoods are not completely segregated at that point. And so some of this is about really intensifying the Jim Crow and the apartheid. And we have not escaped from that to this day.
Yeah. And that seems to, for me, the concept of redlining and the intensification of Jim Crow, that leads into another concept I read as I was researching you and your work of area trauma. And as you know, across this nation, on our second segment, we're going to talk a little bit more about Flint, Michigan. But you have Flint, Michigan, you have Cancer Alley in Louisiana. In Houston, I think it was 100% of the landfills over a 50-year stretch were placed in black neighborhoods. We've got Lowndes County, Alabama, where there's raw sewage running through the yards of black folks in Alabama and causing hookworm disease. It's been called a third world conditions by the UN. So I'd like to kind of dive a little bit into that concept of area trauma as we see ADOS across this nation living in toxic conditions that we have mostly been redlined into and kind of cordoned off into. How do you feel that affects our community specifically?
Well, the thing that I have observed is that this is not a static thing, and it's not a one-way thing. Mm-hmm. And so the policies that have changed where we live and how we live have been many. So there have been repeated blows that have fallen on African American and other poor communities, like urban renewal, like deindustrialization, like mass incarceration, like the failure to manage the epidemics, like the epidemic of crack, like, gentrification now.
Those are accrued injustices.
Absolutely.
But it's like every 10 years there's a major blow to these communities. Mm-hmm. Right now it's COVID, a major blow to these communities, which tears at them and robs them of what they have. And these are never seen as disasters, although they are disasters. And so they're never remediated. So the communities become, tattered by these things. The community is always trying to recover and invent new ways to be itself. So that's the part of it's not one way. So when the crack epidemic and disinvestment of planned shrinkage is devastating inner city neighborhoods, for example, in New York City, the young people invent rap. And they invent rap as a way to talk about the horrors of what they're seeing. Mm-hmm. As a scientist, I went in and interviewed people, and we took photographs. And when you compare what we heard and what we saw to what the young people are rapping about, it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. So they invented a whole new music to say, this is what's happening.
That was the voice. Yeah.
Now what is that? That's sort of what human beings have, that's the light within us, right? That my father's people were teaching him, that the slaves taught my father. Let your light so shine. That's what those young people were doing. They were letting their light so shine. Mm-hmm. So it's never a one-way street, but it is relentless. The whole point, David Harvey says, of neoliberalism is for the rich people to accumulate by dispossessing the other people. Accumulation by dispossession. And we have been frontline victims of that accumulation by dispossession strategy.
Yeah, even in the criminal justice system, dispossession and the highest number of asset seizures happens, unfortunately, to the African American community. You have also on your website, which I really liked, this massive timeline that maps out American history, and it's not just the ADOS perspective or the slavery, the Jim Crow, but it wraps into it the colonies and the colonization, the indigenous wars that happened, not just with the formation of America, but with Britain and with France, and when women and sort of women's suffrage fall into sort of just the whole making of America. I like that project. There was a similar timeline done by the United Fair Economy, and it showed governmental boosts and governmental blocks, and it kind of showed those things by race. And when you look at the Homestead Act, when you look at mortgage interest and just how it was applied and land that was open for European immigrants to just come and participate in, the GI Bill. You look at all of those boosts, and you kind of look at the timeline for the African experience, if you will, in America, and there's been so many blocks. And a lot of times in having conversations, particularly around immigration and what that looks like, I think people have a tendency to just look at their timeline from when they entered, like, the American timeline. And there's sort of this disregard for sort of everything that happened prior to. If you could talk a little bit to how your class even arrived at the project, if you could talk a little bit about, in a way, repairing and having conversations, I think, around reparations and how to do a repair when, as you state, everyone has sort of had some sort of injury. But I think it's arguable that the greatest disadvantages, if you will, have really been housed and placed in the African American community. And I'd just like to hear you talk a little bit about that.
You know, as a psychiatrist, I think many psychiatrists would shy away from comparing the suffering of one group to the suffering of another group.
Yeah, absolutely.
That doesn't feel comfortable to me. And I think it's hard to argue that Native people had it easier than African Americans. The genocide of the Native people is horrible. Something I had never thought about before we made that timeline was that the African Americans that were being brought over to be sold into bondage were going to work land that was being stolen from the Powhatan tribe at that time.
Yeah.
And anyway, I just...
Well, can I ask you a question on that?
But here's what I want to say about the thing is that people know how to build wealth. One of the studies that I had the opportunity to do was a study of urban renewal, 1950s and 1960s program of the federal government that cleared so-called slums, of 2/3 of which were African American neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And people had incredible wealth in those neighborhoods of many kinds. They had cultural wealth. They had jazz clubs. Every neighborhood we studied had more than one jazz club. They had political power that they were building. They had money power. They had businesses. They had churches. They had clubs. They had clubs of many kinds. You know, the gamblers had a club, and the transsexuals had a club, and the hunters had a club. A lot of clubs. All this is very well documented.
Yeah.
This wealth is destroyed. So people, it's the thing about this accumulation by dispossession is that the capitalists are very practiced at taking the money that other people accumulate. And but they also take other things that they've accumulated. They take their friendships, they take their churches, they take their schools, they take their education. So how do you repair all of that? As a social psychiatrist, that, of course, is at the heart of what I think about. And that is not simply about money. It's about community organizations. It's about education. Primarily, it's about stopping this serial forced displacement, stopping the destruction of what people build. It's like, keep your hands off. The people can build wealth if you will leave them alone. But how do you if you want, as I do, to repair these harms done to all these communities, we have to solve that problem. How do we stop the capitalism? Keep your hand out the cookie jar.
Absolutely.
So in a reparations space, let's have that conversation, because a lot of times we are reparationists. ADOS is unapologetically reparationist. I am a reparationist. And that is the motto, and that is the goal for us. A lot of the concerns that have been raised within the ADOS community has been, how does white capital essentially not take the money again? How do the oligarchs not take the money again? Because they currently have all of the infrastructure, whether it's in film and television, whether it's in communications and telephone wiring, whether it's in manufacturing, medical, R&D, whatever sort of industry that you might think of, tech, STEM, science, whatever. if a reparations package is passed that includes monetary compensation in addition to what we hope will be a series of laws that are really intended to repair over a couple of generations, because the harm really occurred over, hundreds of years. So you need to repair at least a couple of generations. How in a post reparations world do we maintain equality? How do we keep the money?
Yeah, that's the big question. The and in that question, you get into, not simply the oppression of Black people, but really the dynamics of capitalism and the dynamics of class. And, we have to admit that the Black capitalists are not different from the white capitalists. So to the extent that they get the money, they're not necessarily nice to the poor people either. So many questions to answer. I don't have all the answers. I do know there's some things you can't take away from people.
Yeah.
You can't take away from them the knowledge. Mm-hmm. And if you can give them a spiritual grounding, you can't take that away from people. So I think that some of this is about how do we give all the people that have been deprived of those things as much of that as we possibly can, that which cannot be taken away.
Yeah. Let's stay with knowledge for just 1 second, because one of the core tenets that you speak about is acknowledgement of suffering. And so as we look out over the landscape of all, across race and ethnicity, we as ADO West see that our suffering is really the kind of what has been hidden and swept under the American rug the most. I mean, if we talk about the UDOC, or United Daughters of the Confederacy, and the lost cause teachings post-Civil War that were designed to kind of cloak ADOS suffering and build a narrative that, we were, Jubilee after emancipation, and then it was up to us on our own volition and bootstraps to bring ourselves up out of poverty and up out of oppression. And then we have, other groups that have had their suffering acknowledged. Like I would argue that the Native Americans have had their suffering acknowledged, and the Jewish community has had their suffering acknowledged. So I'd like to get your perspective on that piece of acknowledgement of suffering. And do you believe that ADOS and the American descendants of slavery should have that same sort of acknowledgement, for lack of a better word now?
It's kind of one of those double-barreled questions where you have a set of premises, and I'm not sure I'm convinced of the premises. If you've been following what's happening in Native communities with COVID or substance abuse disorder or not having health care.
Education, too, is an issue.
Education.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just if acknowledgement is empty and we don't live up to our promises, the promises in our treaties, then have we acknowledged? And if we still have rampant anti-Semitism, have we really acknowledged? Mm-hmm. So I would say that actually those three situations to me are more parallel in that there's lip service, but there's not the real thing, which would be equality and dignity and equal opportunities to access the resources and the blessings of the world. Mm-hmm. So I think the three, but again, I hesitate to compare suffering. Yeah. Who am I to say what a Jewish family that, are survivors of the Holocaust, what they have experienced? How could I know that? Or how could I know what Native people who went through the genocide, how did the Native people survive? How did they do that? How would I don't know. Mm-hmm. I can't, that's not my lived experience. Certainly my father's family, my grandfather was a slave. So I know about that in my bones, in my heart. But you know what I'm saying? I'm inside that suffering, but that's where I kind of.
I guess my point here is that from our perspective and from the ADOS perspective, we see active campaigns of disinformation and misinformation around our history and around our history of suffering in this country. And I'm not necessarily sure that I see the same sort of things in targeting other groups. So I hear you. We're not trying to do.
There's significant omission that I can acknowledge that.
Yeah.
There's significant
not
omissions.
to do the Oppression Olympics or anything like that, but
let's still do the Oppression Olympics, and let's just say that probably to me it's more important to identify rather than compare.
Yeah. So, and even in ADOS reparations, I said there should be an indigenous treaty specialist sitting as a commissioner on HR 40, because someone who's versed in where America has fallen down in prior treaties would be an asset to ADOS reparations, because you got to know how to navigate with the wolf. If this is if this is the nature of the wolf.
We did not honor any of those treaties.
Right. Right.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah, and one final question here, Mindy. You also referenced a study that I found very interesting that compared the health of middle-aged whites in the U.S. to the health of middle-aged whites in the U.K. And you found some interesting things, I guess, in this study. Could you talk a little bit about what you found as between those two groups?
Yeah, it's a study by Sir Michael Marmot's group in the United Kingdom, which has been a leading group looking at social determinants of health. And so what was important was that middle-aged white men in the United States, even the wealthy ones, had worse health than the poor white men in the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. So how I would explain that is that this history of racism and the brutality of capitalism as it's practiced in the U.S. Are part of why we see that. But imagine that the wealthiest white men among these middle-aged white men had worse health than the poorest white men. Mm-hmm. And this is something that's predicted by social psychiatry, that if you have a strong society, or a relatively strong society, everybody is better. And if you have a fractured society, everybody is worse.
Yeah.
People don't like to see that. It was like, no, it's fine if you're white, and if you're black, it's a problem.
Yeah. But
that's not actually, I think, what the reality is.
All right. Well, that is our time. We're going to end on that note. Fascinating work. Mindy. Again, people, if you want to do the I Am from 400 and see some of the other really, really thoughtful exercises, you can go to inequality.org
Can I just say it's 400 years of inequality.org. Inequality.org is also a great website, but not ours.
Got it. And I do have that written here, but not all is one thing. So 400 years of inequality.org for Dr. Mindy Fullilove's work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Fullilove.
It's been a pleasure.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, it was a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
You too.
All right. So we're going to take you guys out to a quick commercial break.
We'll be back in 60 seconds.
Thank you.
Welcome back, family. We're back from break. We're going to do a quick promo, and we're going to jump into the second segment of Politics in Black. So we wanted to talk more about Prop 16 here in California. So if you are ADOS and in California, you need to be aware that Prop 16 is going to be on your November ballot. And if it's passed, Prop 16 would amend the state's constitution to repeal Proposition 209, which effectively banned affirmative action and policies in the state for the past 25 years. By all measured data, Prop 209 has limited and negatively impacted ADOS employment, education, and business opportunities in California. ADOS chapters in California have been working closely with State Assembly member Dr. Shirley Weber, chairwoman of the Legislative Black Caucus, and principal sponsor of Prop 16, to ensure this important ballot measure is supported and ratified in November. So, come voting day in November, vote yes on Prop 16 and restore state policies that directly benefit ADOS communities in California. That's a yes on Prop 16, fam.
All righty. And so we have been Chad and I have been very excited actually to talk to Councilman Eric Mays out of Flint. Flint being representative of the most egregious water health issue relating to black folks, but it also pulled back the cap on the levels of lead and just poor piping and infrastructure that are actually surrounding many communities. So Councilman Eric Mays is a 3-time elected Flint, Michigan City Council member in the 1st Ward. He is also a graduate of Michigan State University with a bachelor's in political science and pre-law, and a former employee of General Motors United Auto Workers. Some of his accomplishments as councilman in Flint include giving houses back to people all across the city before they go to the land bank, voting to switch Flint's water source back to Detroit, helping to get Flint out of a deficit and back into a $24 million fund balance, and getting emergency managers out of there. Being part of the effort to get President Barack Obama to declare the water crisis an emergency, and helping to go to get subsequent federal funding. So we really want to give a big, healthy, warm welcome to Councilman Mays.
Welcome to Politics in Black, Councilman Mays.
Thank you for that introduction, Friday. Good to talk to you, Chad, and I'm glad that the family can hear me, but they don't see me out here on the East Coast. I had some technical difficulties on my end. I really appreciate those points of introduction, Friday.
Absolutely, Councilman. Thank you for being here. I mean, you're known as the voice of 1st Ward, so having your voice is what we need here today. So I want to talk a little bit about your ward. You're about 11,000 residents and 96% black. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And I became aware of you because recently you were, for lack of a better term, you were arrested and escorted out of a council meeting. And as I kind of did some research around why that occurred, because I'd never seen anything like that happen. I'd never seen a sitting councilman handcuffed and walked out of an actual meeting. When I was researching it, it sounded like to me that you were just advocating and fighting against blight in the 1st Ward and were being unapologetic about it. Is that, I mean, can you give us kind of your perspective on what happened? Because I know you're embroiled in that currently.
Yeah, that is correct. I'm the type of person that when I'm elected, the only way you can remove me from my seat, in my opinion, is unelect me.
Amen.
And I'm elected to be the voice. You hear my voice? I haven't had a haircut in this self-quarantine under COVID-19 for about 3-4 months. My hair looked like Cornel West, and I sound like Barry White. But my point is this. When you give me a voice and I have 11,000 people to represent, particularly black folks, I'm going to speak on water. I'm going to speak on housing. I'm going to speak on blight. And if I'm speaking, don't tell me how long I'm going to speak if I'm not ridiculously long, and don't try to remove me. I demanded that if you attempt it, you've got to arrest me and handcuff me, and I'll sue you later.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we need that kind of unapologetic voices in our city councils and in the halls of the legislatures. So let's rewind just a little bit back to 2014, because you really were instrumental in bringing awareness to the Flint water crisis and really getting that crisis declared an emergency, a national emergency, where the federal government got involved. And so could you take us back to 2014 and talk us through kind of that emergency manager law? I think it was PA Public Act 436, and how the city actually made the decision to switch Flint's water over to the Flint River.
You guys have really did your research. In Michigan, the Republicans enacted an emergency manager law. It said, and it was intentionally done, in my opinion, if black strongholds that were Democratic had a deficit, just like some white Republican strongholds, they enacted a law where they would put in what's called an emergency manager. That emergency manager would take over the decision-making, policy-making, and all kind of making of the council, the legislative branch, and the executive branch. We called it an unlawful dictatorship. We said it was discriminatory to do that in Flint, Detroit, Benton Harbor, Pontiac, and we would not stand for it. But they did it by law, and they came in and they made a decision. We had 11 General Motors plants before they pulled out. We've got something called the Flint River. We know that they had been dumping in there, and this emergency manager made a decision to switch from the we got 5 Great Lakes. We were drawing water out of Lake Huron through Detroit, fresh water, and they switched to the contaminated Flint River water and did not put corrosion control in there. That's like baking a cake without putting eggs or baking powder. And then once you do that and you don't treat water right, then the rust and corrosion and lead will seep in and come out of your faucet. Water was coming out brown. People were coming to my house with rashes and hair loss. You must act when you see something like that happening.
And so, ADOS, we're active advocates, right? This show is a singular aspect of what ADOS Los Angeles does. We are into holding our legislators accountable. With the maneuvering that seemed to be done by the Republicans, and when the outcry literally showed up at your door, how did the people of Flint actually mobilize? What were they able to do in terms of elevating this crisis and bringing it into a public awareness?
Well, by me being a graduate of Michigan State University, a dormitory roommate with Magic Johnson, when I seen him go out to Los Angeles and do what he do in basketball and political science, I said, I've got to help take my city to a national championship in advocacy and fighting. And so what I did at that point, I started bringing it up on the council floor. I learned more about it. I say I had to learn about water and treatment and infrastructure just as Forrest Gump had to learn about shrimp. And so once I learned about it, then I was able to protest, march with people, mobilize people. I called the black pastors in to get the numbers up higher. And then we brought it to the attention. Once I went into the law books, I seen language that said whether it was a hurricane, a tornado, or water contamination, you could declare an emergency. And so I maneuvered to get that done, and the emergency was unique. I would advocate that for other communities with problems, and we put Flint on the map. That's the short version.
And I know there's a lot that happened in between. I've watched a lot of documentaries on it, and you are quoted and you speak a lot. You've been outspoken on this subject. And one of the things I saw that really stood out to me is that so before Governor Snyder actually made a decision to move Flint back to the Lake Huron water source, you actually had a bill that got approved in City Council. I think it was 7 or 8 to 1 to return to the Detroit water system and kind of circumvent what was happening, right, and stop what was happening then. But at that time, that emergency manager had some interesting words to say. Is that right?
Yeah, you have to kind of front people off publicly with the media to get stuff done. And the reason they switched back in October, because it was a mayoral election, and they wanted to keep the white guy in. And they knew that he was losing because I had mobilized people. They knew, in fact, that I was fronting the governor and them off for having a dictator in and taking away our democracy, and they were losing. So they switched back to try to keep him in, but it was too late, and the public was aware. And so we took over the mayor's seat. At one point, I was going to be mayor, and we found emails from the governor and stuff saying we got to stop him, and they passed a bill in Lansing in 12 days to keep me from being mayor. And if you think that it was unlike me getting removed and handcuffed from my council seat, I ended up in jail for 28 days as we declared the emergency that I figured I had politically helped to strategize to do. And so I'm telling you, the media, the strategy, the legal mechanics of declaring it, we're still winning. We had over $700 million come in from the state and federal government, and all of it didn't come to us. It went to outside agencies for white folks to control, and that's an issue. I brought in 2 sets of lawyers. We have civil litigation going now. That's kind of like reparations, and we'll see how much and what we get. And then there were criminal prosecutions that just a year or so was mysteriously dropped. And that's the short version again.
We actually have a question coming from our YouTube chat, and the question reads: How can technical folk help in Flint? Does Flint need scientists, engineers for grassroots advocacy? How can people in tech at this point contribute to remedying the problem? Because we all know that even after Obama made his declaration, I don't know that
after he drank the bottled water.
After he did performance art.
No, not a bottle of water, Chad. That was the problem. That's why I was frowning in the documentary. He drank a glass of water as to imply that the water was right, and he should have drunk politically out of a bottle. We were all, and we're still on bottled water.
Right.
Yeah.
But can you answer that question for folks watching on YouTube?
Repeat the question again, Friday.
How can technical folk help in Flint? Are scientists, engineers needed for grassroots advocacy?
Well, Aaron Brockovich chimed in the initial stages and sent her person from California, Robert Bocock, and that's how I got some technical information. Yes, they can always chime in if it's something they want to do. They can call my number, 810-922-4860, Flint, Michigan, Councilman Mays. That's my private cell, 810-922-4860, and we'll move forward. But, you know, if you look at the CARES Act under the COVID-19 and you look at the HEROES Act that they're debating right now under the COVID-19, America is richer than rich. They transferred $2 trillion.
Say it again.
$2 trillion. I didn't say million or billion.
With a T. With a T.
They put money where they want to put it. They can give black folks money. They can give black cities money. So I'll take the technical help because we done already learned and know what to do. Yep. If they put the $1 trillion in our black community like they do when they can do it, then we can fix Flint and help ourselves. This is going to be dollars and cents just like it is across America.
Amen. Amen to that, Councilman Mays. I also want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we don't see, because obviously we're in Los Angeles, we're not in Flint on the ground, but I was shocked to read about residents of Flint receiving water bills for thousands of dollars for years of bad water that they couldn't use, that wasn't potable, that wasn't drinkable. So they're receiving bills for thousands of dollars. Taxes going up in districts that were affected by the Flint water crisis. Property values going down. So we heard on the last segment, urban renewal was basically Negro removal. It sounds a lot like that's what's happening in the wake of the Flint water crisis now. is that there's an effort to remove us from that area.
Disinvestment is the word.
Would you agree, and could you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I can wholeheartedly agree. The emergency manager in his dictator financial role raised the water rates ridiculously. That is part of the settlement type stuff that we want in the class action and individual lawsuits. That emergency manager challenge has been in court to raise those rates, different taxes and stuff. So we're going to see if we get settlement in these civil suits, which has went to the United States Court of Appeals. The Supreme Court refused to hear it, so we won at our top court level, and Governor Snyder is now being deposed. Those cases are moving forward. There's 19 test cases for each class and set of people, kids and adults. Look like we're going to win a big one. And I'm telling you, even though they've paid them, and we want our money back. And we've kept this city running. Flint, Michigan is not as large as Los Angeles, as you all know. I'm talking to people. People trust me. And we've got the lawyers moving. And we're winning in the civil lawsuit system. So we'll fix that, and hopefully that'll be our form of reparations just for that. Not overall as black folks, but for some of those dictated costs.
So let me ask this question, because in our talking, and we talked prior to the interview, what is most fascinating to me is that everything that was done to hinder what you were trying to do
and to silence you
is technically legal, right? The maneuvering and the things that were done to the law. However, it could be argued like, oh, this wasn't racist. No, this wasn't targeted. We just decided that we were going to call in this emergency. And I know, your ward has maybe 11,000 people. It is 96% African American. The income level is, 22,000, which we know is significantly below the national average income in terms of wealth and the community itself. I mean, how would you advise ADOS chapters? We have members around the country in terms of their advocacy and interfacing with city councils and trying to stand up and trying to essentially not have de-investment in the communities that we're living in across the country. How would you advise the ADOS folks to actually go into these council member meetings and to say what is said? Because you mentioned learning about the subject matter, mobilizing and learning about the law in terms of what you could do. And so talk to us in terms of advocates when we come to interface with our local governments, how we can be better at that.
Find the smart one. I'm going to blow my own horn. Find the smart one like me. Find the one that specialize in their trade like a Magic Johnson or a Councilman Mays. Maybe you got to find a Michigan State Spartan. But my point is this. They said it was legal for us to be slaves. They said we was 3/5 of a man. That was law. But I don't buy law because man make law. Man can change law. I'm a legislator. I write law. So I don't care what they put on the law books. My job is to write and change law and make it right. So whether it's a councilman, whether it's a state representative or a senator or a United States congressman, if we had more time, I'll tell you how I've taken people to Washington and changed law. So I don't hang my hat on law that they write. I hang my hat on law that we write.
Mm-hmm. Amen to that.
I love that. And Councilman Mays, what I see too, kind of looking from the outside, is looks like you have faced personally a lot of repercussions and reprisals because you have been so outspoken and unapologetic. And we talked a little bit prior to this call, and I heard the pattern of local government moving the goalpost when it came to you, in your election bid, in the elections, and how voter suppression is occurring out there. So I'm curious to your point of view on kind of the consequences, and because we're all activists, right? And I'd like to hear a little bit of what you've gone through personally in your advocacy there in Flint.
Personally, I will fuss, I will cuss, and I'll do certain things. That's my personal life. Mm-hmm. And so it's only one man that I know in what I believe in that walked the earth perfect. So if you're looking for a perfect man personally, that won't be me. But if my personal life is legal and you don't like it because I fuss and cuss is not illegal. And so people will gang up on me sometime and try me personally. But when I get back into my professional arena, they've got a problem. That's where they're losing at.
Amen. Amen.
And so it's that fight is never going to be easy.
Yeah.
We had one ADOS local win in Jacory, Arthur, down in Louisville. Kentucky, in Louisville, Kentucky. We have Tamara Shealy, who's running for Senate in Georgia for the state of Georgia. And we encourage ADOS to not just do the advocacy part. If you can, we encourage people to run, but it's also important to share stories like yours, Councilman, because it is an investment, and it's not necessarily going to be easy. And depending on how much power one can yield as a legislator, it comes, unfortunately, with challenges that are really hard. And so we have to be strong-willed and strong-minded in our advocacy. This has been great.
Yeah. And Councilman, thank you for being here. I just want you to know that, ADOS and, we're organizing. We are around the country. There's a chapter in Detroit that's getting up off the ground and getting active, and we got your back. So, you are of the people, you are for the people, and we need more people like you that are in like I said, in these city council meetings, that are in the halls of power to speak for us unapologetically. So please keep doing what you're doing, and know that there are people out here who see that, and we appreciate it, and that we are right there beside you fighting this fight.
And folks that may want to continue to support Councilmember Mays, you can follow him on Twitter at EricMays58. He also provided his phone number, so if you want to call him directly,
don't call him too late, y'all.
If you want to call, look,
anytime. All right, 24. Yeah, Councilman's open 24 hours.
If you have the ability to help and want to connect, you can call him directly at 810-922-4860.
Go ahead, Councilman Mays.
Thanks for having me. From Flint, Michigan to Los Angeles, we're a small town, and y'all made me feel big time. I hope to connect and work with you guys.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
If you need us to elevate anything, I'm following you. I am Friday Jones on Twitter.
I am _Chad Boogie. Please reach out to us.
Flint better watch out. I done hooked up with some big time.
All right, Councilman Mays, you take care.
God bless you. God bless you, family.
Thank you, fam. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. That was powerful.
Not all heroes wear capes, y'all.
Not all heroes wear capes.
Yeah.
Sometimes they wear cuffs.
That's right.
We really wanted to emphasize some of the personal investment that Councilmember Mays has made to better Flint. We all live in different areas that suffer from high rates of asthma, that suffer from high rates of cancer. COVID has really lifted the veil, and it has shown us how vulnerable we are as a people. And part of that has to do with our environment and the traumas that you heard from Dr. Mindy Fullilove. One generation after the next compiled is something that Yvette Carnell has talked about, and it's important that from our lives we're able to be effective in countering those things. So
absolutely. I appreciate the councilman being here. He, again, is fighting the good fight, y'all. And so anything we can do to support him and to support others around the country, because this isn't just Flint. We got to remember that we've got Lowndes County, Alabama. We've got Houston, Texas after Harvey, and New Orleans Cancer Alley to Baton Rouge. So we have to get active in all of our communities and understand that these are silent killers. The environment that we have been redlined into and cordoned off into is in many cases toxic. And so we need folks in these halls of power that are speaking to that and trying to rectify it and bring redress to our communities. So please get involved, y'all.
All right. And just so you know, ADOS Los Angeles has our next general meeting August 8th, the first Sunday, August 8th, first Sunday, first Saturday in August. You can sign up and you can get more information by registering for our newsletter at adosla.org, where we will feed that information to you. Mm-hmm. And in closing, I just want to reiterate again, we out here in California are really pushing for California AB 3121. The regents of the UC system want to create a task force to study and develop a reparations proposal. On June 3rd, in a vote of 13-4, the Appropriations Committee of the California Legislature, I always struggle with that, voted for a task force to study and develop reparations proposal for African Americans. This task force will focus on resulting racial wealth inequity due to slavery and institutional racism. This is a win, not just for African Americans, but for Californians at large. It's time that we heal. It's time that different communities do come together and support ADOS in this reparations effort. It's a national effort. That's just the California leg. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, that's it. We had another one. We made it through. Another one in the can. So thanks again, folks, for being here for Politics in Black, brought to you by ADOS Los Angeles. I once again am Chad_Boogie.
I am Friday Jones on Twitter and Instagram.
And we'll see you again in another 2 weeks, Sunday, 4 to 5 p.m.
All right. Take care.
Take care, fam.